atah Adonai noten Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
An American Indian communing with himself and with God. A Jewish youth at the ceremony of his coming of age, the bar mitzvah, when he learns the responsibilities of his adulthood. The human voice is our basic tool of expression, our inner and our outer means of communication. We use it for song because it is the most immediate and compelling way of formulating and conveying our emotions and our thoughts to ourselves and to others. In fact, I would say that the human voice and human song are the very definition of the human species. In Tibet and other parts of Central Asia, there is convincing evidence that harmony itself may have been discovered through the use of the single human voice. Listen to these Tibetan monks chanting in deep tones as part of their meditation. Each monk is in fact creating his own harmony by using the power of the voice to create its own natural overtones. A different but also very fascinating tradition evolved over the centuries in Switzerland, in which a single voice is trained to shift gears, as it were, between two registers. This age-old technique is known as yodeling. Here, voices combine in the way which was to produce Western harmony. If I emphasize the voice, it is to show that those vibrations from within ourselves are the very source of all our music. Here in the West, the music we know owes everything to the human voice. We should remember those early Christians herded into Roman arenas, singing to keep up their spirits and to proclaim their faith. Those chants came from Greek, Jewish, and other Middle Eastern origins. We cannot trace them easily because the written records and the oral traditions have been largely lost. Although the Christian church spread across the whole arc of Europe from its center in Rome, it was only at its eastern end in Byzantium, nearer its birthplace, that it became rooted in the 3rd century in a rival center. There, influences which fashioned its sounds and its images were of local origin, Hebrew and Greek, to be joined later by strains of Syrian and Armenian. Hymns are usually sung by a single cantor, who is thus able to exercise more freedom in decorating the melodic line than would be available to a choir, who might have to sing it more slowly. Here in the ancient monastery of Caseriani, the Angelopoulos choir of Athens is singing a chant whose tradition runs back to the time of the Caesars. From his minaret, the muezzin proclaims, "Only God is God, and Muhammad is his prophet." Muslims do not define this chanting as music. In fact, music is banned from worship altogether. Yet here, as in Christianity, the voice still remains the clearest communal expression of the love of God. It took less than 2 centuries after the appearance of Muhammad for Islam to dominate the Middle East, where at Mecca it established its holy center. There, the black draped Kaaba, with its ancient and sacred stone, remains the symbol of worship for millions. In common with the Christians, the voice is not the property of the chosen few, but belongs as an expression of all the people. The power of Islam originating in Arabia extended by land throughout the warm latitudes, all the way from Spain to Southeast Asia and even on to the Pacific beyond. In India, it met a very ancient, coded and classical tradition. There, music for the single voice or instrument reached its highest peak. India was peaceful, her arts flourished, and music of incredible purity and refinement emerged. Perhaps the most inspired exponent of this great art, in which the single, highly decorated melody is sustained above the drone and the rhythm of the tabla, is my friend and colleague Ravi Shankar, the world's outstanding sitar player. He has come here to Gstaad in Switzerland to take part in my annual music festival. Ravi, that was a most happy piece you played. Tell us about the raga.
This is a night raga called Rageshri. This particular raga has quite a happy mood, but when played in solo, it can be also very devotional. The same raga sometimes can be also happy if played in a faster tempo.
That depends on the tempo. Does that...
Shall I show you?
Yes, please,
yeah.
show.
The ascending and descending structure of this raga is very unusual. It doesn't have the fifth at all.
That is unusual.
And it doesn't touch the second note, so it goes like that in the ascending.
Yes. Yes, the extraordinary complexity of Indian melodic ornamentation and invention and the rhythmic. I think it is because your music has never been drowned in harmony, that you've kept the clarity and the complexities of the structure. What rhythm did you use in the last
This
one?
was known as Rupak Tal, a cycle of 7 beats, divided 3, 2, 2, like din, din, na, din, na, din, na, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You know that each of the sound he produces with his hands has a separate sound syllable.
Yes.
This is how we teach our students also, and it can be written down. You know, our whole system is an oral tradition. It's not a written down music.
No, that's why it's alive.
Yeah. So while we teach a tabla student, we have to use a certain sound syllable structure. Like each sound produced with the hand has a separate word for it, like this. Ta, tin, na, tit, ti, ta, ti, na, Now he will say something more complex and play immediately with his hands.
One of the greatest of many fortunes that music has offered me is that of being entrusted by Ravi Shankar with the playing together of several pieces which he created especially so that he could reveal to me something of the magic world of his musical style. What an immense journey from the ornamented Buddhist ragas of India to Christian plain song. Halfway along that path, on the island of Crete, we find a connection in this version of a 1,000-year-old ballad celebrating a warrior's struggle against the infidels of Islam and against death itself. In Spain, Moor, Christian, and Jew had retained a remarkable coexistence for centuries. The Moors, intelligent and pragmatic, had permitted some Christians to pursue their faith quite openly, especially here in Toledo, while neatly extracting from them a fairly substantial tax in return for their tolerance. These Christians developed a form of plain song called Mozarab, or mock Arab. The solo voice is decorated gently in the Moorish style. Senor José Luis Ochoa is Spain's outstanding expert in this particular music.
Et murus pariter dissipatus.
The sound that carried the Christian message for over 1,000 years shared the same impulse and intention as that of all great religions, the worship of the universal. Here at Salisbury Cathedral, the sound is different, but the message is identical, and it still has the power to move us today. Echoing within its vast spaces resounded the voices that were the beginnings of the growth of Western music. Plain song remained a single melodic line sung in unison, as in the tradition of the Middle East. The unity of many voices singing as one was first codified through the efforts of Pope Gregory in 600 AD. This sound was in part a reaction against Rome with its blaring fanfares. Even the organ was not allowed here at first. The Romans had used hydraulic organs in the Colosseum and other places of public entertainment. Here, this was considered pagan and rather vulgar. In medieval times, the organ was at first restricted only to the court. The break with the single voice came slowly to the West. In Romanesque churches of the time, a new sound was being heard.
Sit gloria Domini in secula letavitur Dominus in operibus suis.
These voices no longer moved only in unison or at the octave. They added another voice in between, at the fifth, which followed like a shadow, as the others had, moving in exact parallel. Perhaps it started as an improvisation to accommodate different voice ranges.
Sit gloria Domini in secula letavitur Dominus in operibus suis.
It led to a new and more daring invention.
Rex celi Domine maris undisoni, vitalis mitidis qualique son.
Two separate voices, moving apart, coming together again, moving apart once more. The idea may have originated with the popular tradition of the day, but we cannot know for sure because that music was not written down.
Rex celi Domine maris undisoni, vitalis mitidis qualique son.
As architectural techniques became more and ever more sophisticated, the smaller and very beautiful Romanesque and Byzantine churches were giving way to the more Gothic cathedrals such as Chartres and Canterbury. In their imposing interior spaces, musical instruments were finally readmitted to accompany plain song, and the sound on feast days must have been truly glorious. The daily grind of the peasants bound to the soil may seem as immutable as the life of their cattle, compared with the lords and their manners, dedicated to the perfection of the arts of battle. Throughout this entire period, Western life had in fact suffered many and appalling upheavals. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned emperor, and a semblance of authority and harmony began. Yet throughout history, the centralizing of power has brought about the downfall of the previous, more elegant civilization. In 1096, the first of the Crusades began. There was great jubilation when word came of the fall of Jerusalem to the Crusaders in 1099. Throughout the medieval period, Europeans in great numbers made the perilous pilgrimage to another holy city, Santiago de Compostela, in northwestern Spain. Here at Burgos and at intervals along the road, monasteries sprang up to shelter the faithful. The pilgrims shared the ideas they brought with them from so many regions of Europe. The trail became a great cultural melting pot. Santiago de Compostela ranked with Rome and Jerusalem as one of the three holy places of medieval Christendom. From Santiago, equally vital as a center of music, comes the chant you are hearing now. New musical ideas such as this were spread across Europe by pilgrims returning home. The pilgrim's goal, the cathedral at Santiago, in which the disciple St. James is said to be buried. Behind this false facade, built 300 years ago, stands the original entrance, one of the glories of Spain, rightly called the Portico de la Gloria. It is a perfect treasury of the musical instruments of 800 years ago, carved in its stones. There can be no greater proof of the importance of music both to the church and to the pilgrims who reached Santiago. The year is now 1199 and we are in Paris. Here it is that Western music made the full and final break with the long tradition of plainsong. For miles around, the twin towers of Notredam Cathedral dominate the horizon. Here, the voices of men and boys and of instruments mingled with the organ, at last admitted to the church. This music is by Perrotin, music director of Notredam, one of the very first composers known to us by name. The style itself is called organum. It marks the true beginning of Western harmony in 3 and even 4 independent parts. This hymn to St. Magnus originated here in the Hebrides, north of Scotland, and is sung in parallel voices only a third apart. Such sounds as these were banned at Notredam, where their sensual quality was considered a sure path to the devil. This is Summer is a Comin' In, one of the most famous of all English songs, and the oldest and most complex we know from this period in the form of a round or canon. 4 main voices carry the melody, entering one after the other. The manuscript we have dates from about 1260, and the song was written down because it was so difficult that the singers would otherwise most likely have got it wrong. When all the voices are sounding together, this music reveals one of the most powerful effects known in Western music, the resolution of harmonic tension through the return to a home key. In the past, popular music was by definition almost never written down. How wonderful it is, therefore, and yet how natural, that such compelling evidence of the breakthrough in harmony should come to us in a popular song. There was, of course, a great deal of music outside the church, especially for dancing. Melodies with a fresh flavor and a bouncing rhythm were irresistible. This dance, known as the estampie, probably had its origins in France. The instruments accompanying such dances were infinitely more variable than ever before. The reeds, for one, had been brought home by the Crusaders from the Middle East, and thus both the dance and its music for popular use developed and spread to all parts of Europe. In all the lands of the West, the pace of life was quickening, the arts flourishing, and at the center of this momentum was the artist, whose energy and ideas were proving vital to this burgeoning civilization. This is the great time of the troubadours, celebrating the capture of Jerusalem and other such deeds of valor, relating colorful legends and offering love songs such as the popular Calenda Maya, which spread right across Europe. It even became a part of many settings of the Holy Mass. Two major influences, that of the Latin language and the Christian religion, had to a large extent unified Europe, encouraging the traffic which loosened the social and moral strictures of the Dark Ages so radically that the troubadours were able to introduce the first earthy and passionate love songs. Despite the easing of certain codes, that of marriage remained rigidly the same. The knight was bound by chivalry and honor to an arranged marriage based on property, family ties, or by royal decree. The dedication of the romantic love song to the lady of his heart enabled him at one and the same time to abide by the rules which bound him to his legal wife while sublimating his passion for another in music. In about 1345, Jacopo da Bologna set to music this beautiful love poem by Petrarch, the great Italian poet of the Renaissance. Non al suo amante piacque Dian. Shall we try, no? The medieval plague, the terrible Black Death, the first epidemic between 1348 and 1351, swept like a great scythe through Europe, claiming in some of the towns 95% of the population. The devastation it wrought was not only physical but spiritual, for as it dragged on savagely and intermittently for the following 3 centuries, it shook the faith of Christians to the very foundations.
A tissue, you all fall down. Don't fall down. Come on.
Many of us have sung this tune as children. Do we remember that it is a song about the Black Death in London in 1666? Ring Around the Roses describes the open sores of the sick and dying. Pocketful of Posies refers to flowers carried to ward off the stench. Atishu, Atishu imitates the rapid gasp of the condemned. All Fall Down is for grim death itself. One artist who escaped the plague was Guillaume de Machaut, one of the greatest poets and composers of any age. This song is one among the many of his inimitable love ballads. Machaut can be considered as the first great European composer, as in a sense he was the last of the troubadours. During the plague, the continual conflict between Christians and Moors abated. It was at this time that most beautiful and civilized work of Islamic architecture, the Alhambra, summer and winter palaces of the sultans, had been completed. Mathematics and science flourished alongside music, and echoing through the grace and lightness of these filigree arches, competing with the sounds of flowing water from fountain and canal, rose the voices of the musical instruments. The very walls are decorated not with images, for these were banned, but with words from the Koran in that graceful Arabic script, and with abstract designs of extraordinary diversity. In the 8th century, the Moors dominated almost all of Spain. St. James, buried at Santiago de Compostela in the north, was said to have been seen in battle on a white horse, leading Spanish troops against the Moors. Such an image was reproduced all over Spain, particularly on church altars. The saint became the inspiration of militant Christianity, determined to drive the Moors from Spain. It took more than 7 centuries, but gradually the Spanish pushed the Moors southward. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finally expelled them from their last stronghold. On January 2nd, 1492, Granada fell. This was one of the great landmarks in Spanish history, for the victory united Spain, and later that very year, confident in their newfound power, the king and queen financed the expedition of Christopher Columbus to the New World. The Alhambra, empty and abandoned, remained so until Charles V, with the arrogance of the victor, built himself this massive stronghold, which is considered, so I am told, Spain's finest Renaissance palace. But to me it seems a symbol of that dread Inquisition that was so pitilessly and self-righteously to exterminate supposed enemies of the faith. At the beginning of the 15th century, a new clarity of harmony, almost totally free of dissonance, pervaded European music in general, and especially that of Guillaume Dufay, whose motet Apostolo Glorioso we are now hearing. This insistence on the agreement of separate parts led to musical laws which Dufay helped to codify, aimed at ensuring that the ear would never be offended. These rules were insisted upon for all music heard in church. It was at sacred retreats, such as this Spanish monastery at Silos, that melody, amplifying the word, came to be written down. Along with harmony, the notation of music uniquely marks the music of the West. In terms of the notation of music, we have here the very first efforts to indicate on paper what had long been an oral tradition. Last syllables of words are prolonged on a single line. A few symbols above the line, called neumes, indicate the intonations, the oscillations of the voice. The manuscript of 1009 became, in the 1100s, continuous music, still on one line. The intoning of plainsong was written with the neumes either above or below the line, indicating more clearly in which direction the voice should move. At the magnificent Bodleian Library of Oxford University, which still preserves the hushed spirit of the cloister, we find further evidence of the long struggle to create a reliable means of putting notes on paper. The Greeks and Romans had used letters, but as we saw in the Silos manuscript, a system of tiny signs called neumes, possibly of Semitic origin, was evolving. These first began to be set down around 900 AD. For instance, this is what those little neumes looked like at the dawn of our notation. The text is a Latin song to the Muses by a 5th century author. This manuscript, and the little neumes themselves, date from the 9th century. This is not a church hymn, nor is it plain song or Gregorian chant. It is one of the oldest examples known of notated secular music in the West. Of all the beautiful manuscripts at Oxford, none is more famous than this Winchester troper, which dates from the 11th century. Here we see that notation in staves has replaced the original neumes. A stave is a set of one or more lines intended to help establish the exact distance and pitch between notes, while their duration was determined by their shape and color. Yet this music was mostly known by heart, and the neumes were simply a convenient reminder for the director. The problem was to develop a clear and dependable form of musical writing, simple enough to be read by amateurs. Large and noble volumes like this were used by many singers at once. This is a 15th century volume with music by Dufay, written down during his lifetime. It is Italian, probably Venetian, and contains 325 pieces by 56 composers. For many of them, it is the only known copy, the sole copy in the whole world. There are no bar lines, it is not a score, the parts are still separate. Notation was a giant step in the development of Western music. Composers could at last preserve their works for posterity. For a long time, music continued to come in separate parts. These handwritten part books date from about 1530 and contain masses by the English composers Christopher Tye, John Taverner, and John Shepherd. Here we see something new. The bar line has appeared, not so much to set the rhythm as to keep the parts orderly. Printing was the final step, for with the possibility of duplication came the spread of music, passing from a treasury to an open market. These psalms, dating from the late 1500s, are by one of the most inspired of English composers, William Byrd. In the same way as the printing of the Gutenberg Bible advanced literacy in one great bound, So the printing of music encouraged amateur and professional alike to explore and experiment in the playing of music from many countries. I acknowledge that through musical notation, we have accumulated a vast literature of masterpieces, an invaluable human heritage. I owe it my life. But I'm equally aware as an interpreter how much we must continually compensate for our servitude, how essential it is to have a lively imagination, an intuitive and sensitive intelligence, for otherwise the notes entrusted to paper would take on a greater importance than the very music they intend to convey. And bells, too, are music. The chimes of the clock tower, the bell ringers of Venice sounding the hours, announcing the news, the summoning handbell of the town crier. And all the while, musicians were developing their particular skills, beginning to concentrate on the instrument of their choice, so that standards of playing were becoming higher and higher, and the demands for their talents resulted in the gathering together of groups of players for dancing, for entertainment at banquet, and other social events. As music spread throughout all classes, the court drew more and more upon the rich source of folk melodies, converting them into such exquisitely formal dances as this pavan. This grave and graceful dance was generally followed by its more athletic counterpart, the gaillard. Following the plague and the Inquisition, there was an extraordinary awakening in Europe, as if persecution and disease were a stimulus to the visionary in mankind. This energy that sent explorers around the Cape of Good Hope, up the St. Lawrence, capturing lands in the New World, and even navigating with Magellan around the world itself, was more than simply materialistic. It was a recognition that man's life was his own and not church property. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg, condemning the excesses of the Church of Rome. The Reformation was born. Perhaps that very step in emancipation projected societies towards those competitive and materialistic ambitions that have been the hallmark of our civilizations ever since. The music we've come to know and to love was being forged out of the stress of that period we've come to call the Renaissance. To most of us, the word Renaissance evokes painting, literature, drama, architecture, and finally, music. It was at this time that music made a very critical contribution to our thinking process, just as it had done from the time we were still living in caves. The process of trial and error, of testing ways to put music together, much as was happening in the realm of science. For music is both art and science. In fact, Greece had been rediscovered. The ideal human form appealed to that age. Greek literature and drama made a profound impression on all artists. Europe had regained its sense of continuity with its own past. From now on, man was to be the measure of all things. Music, till now carried by the instruments and voice of monk and troubadour, was transferred to the printed page. the one-sheet popular song was born, of which this charming madrigal is an example. When I was a wanton wench of 12.
When I was a wanton wench of 12 years of age, these courtiers with their amours, they came to my courage.
Those amateurs who could read and learn such music in their turn taught it to others. By now, such a broad range of music could be played or sung in public or at home that this created a tremendous demand for a fresh supply of new and varied styles. Songs had always been part of popular culture, but the printing of them brought a proliferation of composers of lesser rank whose work spread in a way not possible before.
Our soldiers were brave and our courtiers were good. Oh, the roast beef of old England, and oh, for old England's roast beef. Our fathers of old were robust, stout and strong, and kept open house with good cheer all day long, which made their plump tenors rejoice in this song. Oh, the roast beef of old England, and oh, for old England's roast beef.
The church organ was now a glorious instrument. This one at Covarrubias in Spain was built in the 1600s to specifications of the century before. It is one of the oldest still in fine working order. The music is by one of Spain's finest masters, Antonio de Capethon. Blind since infancy, he was organist to Charles V and after to Philip II, with whom he traveled all over Europe. Here, in Covarrubia, we are at the birthplace of the Castilian dynasty and the power of Spain. Even the gold of the Incas from Peru has been brought over to glorify the church and its servants, the Catholic kings of Spain. In Rome, the focus of Catholic power was St. Peter's Basilica. Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina is usually singled out as the savior of church music at a time when it stood to lose much of its independence. But it would be truer to say that he and his closest colleagues together showed the way towards a new kind of liturgical polyphony. Europeans, who had once banded together in holy crusade, now fought each other perpetually. Spain had lost her great navy, the Armada. Africa, now mainly colonized, was providing a lucrative slave trade for the New World. Gradually in this turmoil, medieval ideas were waning, and from this dissolution was emerging a new kind of politics, a new approach to learning and the arts. At the heart of this lively and busy world was the maritime city-state of Venice, already for centuries not only the most brilliant, beautiful, and powerful city, but the possessor of the only empire of the medieval world. Venice, entirely independent, trading with all countries irrespective of their affiliations. She could provide larger armies and navies for hire than those possessed by most kingdoms. While Rome was the center of papal power, Venice outshone all other cities in the richness of her culture. Her beauty and power attracted the brightest minds and the most gifted artists. In music, Venice occupied much the same position as Vienna was to assume some 2 centuries later. Printing of music had also begun in Venice, so those fortunates who came here were able to carry away her musical treasures, not only in their ears but in their luggage, thus spreading the fame of Venetian music throughout the world. Voices and instruments combined on a scale never before imagined. One can assert that the idea of designating specific parts for specific instruments chosen by the composer rather than left to chance, the art of orchestration was born here. The Basilica of St. Mark became the musical center of the world at the end of the 16th century. The musical life of Venice was dominated by 2 remarkable men, Andrea Gabrieli and his nephew Giovanni. They evolved ways of balancing huge choruses with massed brass by placing them at the 4 corners of the basilica. Add to this 2 organs, and the resultant spectacle must have been overwhelming for both ears and eyes, as it still is today. This was indeed a summit for the music of the Renaissance and a turning point. A work such as In Excelsis Domino by Giovanni Gabrieli could be heard as far away as in this splendid cathedral of Canterbury in England. Such a work was a glorious note on which to end the total dominance of the human voice in music and to signal the rising importance of the instruments